Okay, let me explain what I have here. So here's the key. I've got birth rate in yellow, death rate in, so this is actually sort of a pink color, and then a total population there in blue. I'm going to call that total pop just because I don't want to write the word population. This is called the demographic transition. This is a chart you're definitely going to see in the textbook and on the test in one form or another. And I will fill in more stages, but at this original stage, this first stage, birth rate is super high and it fluctuates a lot, okay? And it's going to fluctuate on all sorts of things. It's going to fluctuate, and this is true of the death rate. You see is also very high, and it fluctuates. Sometimes it's over the birth rate, sometimes it's under. And what's happening there is that in these countries, at this point in the transition, then lots of things affect the death rate. It can be climate, if there's a drought, or if there's, clan disturbances, clan wars, that sort of thing, or rival warlords and tribes, that sort of thing. The population is going to stay low because the death rate is so high. This first sort of section here, we don't use the term third world anymore. This is called developing nations. Okay? And then we have a huge shift starting to happen, is that our death rate starts to decline, but birth rate stays high. And so when that happens, if our birth rate's real high and our death rate is sinking, then that population is going to start coming right up, particularly about right here. Okay? And there's a lot of reasons for that. So why would your death rate drop? So this declining death rate is going to be due to a lot of things like medical care, medical care is a big one. That says medical care, I promise. And it's going to be things like education. It's going to be access. I can't remember the country, but I think it's Chad or maybe Congo or something like that. I can't remember. It's one of those West African nations, but only 4% of the roads are paved. 4%. Okay, so if you need to go to the hospital, there are hospitals, but if you need to go to the hospital, it could take you a week to get there. Whereas on a paved highway, it could take you an hour. And so a lot of people even die simply because there is no access, or just not correct access. There is medical care available. There are educated doctors and nurses and things like that, but do you have access to them? So that's what I mean by access. And there's a lot going on there. Also, food system. Food system is a big deal. Does everyone have access to the food that's grown or produced? Is there enough food being produced at all? Another thing is public sanitation. It's a hot button issue at the moment. One of the main things to keeping your death rate down is public sanitation. Now, at this time, birth rate is still going to stay very high. So I'm going to draw an arrow to that. This very high birth rate. And there's a lot of reasons for that. This is a time of plenty. This is a time of success, okay? So things are getting better in this country. Medical care is available. There are doctors and nurses. There are medical schools. There's food. There's clean water. So there is a time of plenty. If you're going to have kids, now is the time to have kids. And in a lot of these countries are agrarian still, okay? It's an agrarian economy, and we do need kids. Like these people need kids to work on the farm, to help out, to help take care of the parents and that sort of thing. So there's a high birth rate because of several things. We have a time of relative success. Children needed, okay? In one way, work around the house, working on the farm, that sort of thing. And there has not been a culture shift having lots of kids is still seen as the way to succeed. How will our tribe, how will our clan succeed? How will my family name carry on is by having more children. So there is a culture of wanting big families. These are often very, very religious nations as well. So I'm going to put cultural and religious preference, right? Cultural and religious preference or expectation of large families. There was a time here, even in the American West, where like if you had 8, 9, 10, 11 kids, then you were a successful woman. If you could raise them, you could feed them all, you were a successful man. And that was a mark of winning, of success, was having 8, 9, 10 kids. Now there's a culture shift, whereas if you had 10 kids, you're crazy, right? You get a TLC show if you got 8 kids because it's just so abnormal. Right around here, right when birth rate starts to drop, that marks the end of the transitional phase, transitional. Now, transition to what, you may ask? This would be an industrialized nation. And by the way, this population line, this blue line, should actually go a lot higher, but I left it low because I knew I was going to write up here. So actually that line should be up here somewhere. But, you know, it is what it is. I've got to keep that line just a touch low. So use your imagination. This phase here, our population is quite high. Death rate is down low. We've really got good medical care. We've got the food system figured out. People have access to food. There are social programs like soup kitchens and that sort of thing. There's a way for you to be taken care of, even if you're poor. Even if you're poor, your life expectancy is still pretty good. And if you're very wealthy, your life expectancy is very, very good. Now, you see the major shift here is in this birth rate. Okay, so why would the birth rate fall through the bottom like that? Well, in these industrialized nations, there's a lot going on right here-ish, and I'm going to draw an arrow to that. This is probably where the biggest shift happens. So why would birth rate really start to plummet? There's a lot of reasons. One of them is equality for women. Okay, if things are equal for women, if there's equal rights and equal expectations, then a lot of women don't want to get married at 14 and have 12 kids. They want to work on their career. They want to go to school and finish school. Back here, in a lot of these countries, women aren't allowed in school. Women aren't allowed in school. Think about that. And there was a time when that was the case here, where college, high school and college was not for women. So this equality has to do with education for women. Also has to do with opportunity in the workforce. If you don't want to have 12 kids, you want to have one kid, have a nanny, and then work on your career and have a successful corporate career in an industrial nation, then you can, right? Because you have the right and cultural, it's a cultural norm for you to do so. It's not frowned upon. You're not ostracized from society if you don't really want to have 12 kids. If you want to put off being married till you're 30 or 40, really grind hard on your career, and then not have kids and have a cat, that's fine. It's a total cultural norm for this to happen in these industrial nations. So equal rights for women, educational opportunities for women, opportunities in the workforce for women, then the birth rate drops dramatically. The other thing is access or knowledge of contraception, what we'll call family planning. And that kind of has those subtitles too of education. Do you know about birth control? Do you know about Plan B? Do you know about condoms and things like that? Do you know about vasectomies and this sort of thing? And then, of course, access. Knowing that you can plan your family size, knowing that you're allowed to stop having children if you want is one thing. But having access to that family planning materials, and like if you want a vasectomy, then you can get one. If you want condoms, you can get one, that sort of thing. And it's not frowned upon, hidden from you, illegal, that sort of thing. Then you have access. You know about it and you can get it. The other thing here is rising cost of childcare. Okay, it's not like back here when your grandmother, your aunties, and uncles, and everybody else has no job, everyone's working on the farm, everyone works together to raise these 12, 13 kids, and all the kids are working on the farm, that sort of thing. In these industrialized nations, kids aren't allowed to work. Child labor laws, okay? Everybody else has got a career they're working on. They're in school. You know, your auntie's going back to school at 40 to finish her master's and become a real estate agent or whatever. Child care's in this country, it's like $1,000 a month per kid. So I mean, it's really, really rising costs. So that's so like daycare costs, that sort of thing. Also housing costs. So if you look at House Hunters International, or if you look at New York or LA or these very post-industrial nations, Chicago, Detroit, things like that. Well, not so much in Detroit. You can get a house for nothing in Detroit, but because Detroit's a ghost town. But okay, let's take a look at New York. Let's say you want to have 3 or 4 or 5 kids in New York. Please go look at how much an apartment costs in New York, and then try to find yourself. Go look on any of the websites where homes and apartments are listed, and look at what a 5-bedroom apartment costs, and you're going to be staggered at the monthly cost. So housing these children becomes extremely expensive. And also a lot of cases the food cost is really, really high because things are shipped to you, trucked to you, flown to you. This is not where everybody's working on a farm, okay? This is where we all live in a giant city, like in America, where 80% of the population or more lives in big cities, and all your food has to be trucked in, flown in, brought in on trains, etc. And that rises food miles, is what it's called, food miles. That increases the cost of food dramatically and raising children dramatically. One of the other things here is college, is education. You're not going to have 8 kids in this country right now because it's going to be real hard to put any of them through any sort of college or trade school. Back here, no one goes to college or trade school, okay? Particularly if you have young girls, they're not even allowed in school, okay? So there's not even a chance of that happening. So we don't have to save for college if we're back here. What we're trying to do is subsistence living. We're chasing around fire ants and living off the land and hunting bush meat and, you know, walking miles for wood to boil water for sanitation, you know, that kind of sort of thing. We're not saving for college. Here we're saving for college. So you're only going to have a couple of kids. Out there, and I could keep going, but let's get on to post-industrial. So at post-industrial, there's a couple of signs of post-industrialism is an actual decreasing population. Decreasing population except for immigration. Not immigration, people coming in. So the United States would actually be decreasing in population. Right now we have about 330 million citizens, and that would be decreasing. And it would have been for the last probably 10, 15 years at least, except for immigration. The only reason our population is staying steady or going up just a touch, just barely, is from immigration. Now, if you look here, death rate is higher than birth rate. The people that had one kid, mom and dad pass away from age, not from any sort of, not being attacked by lions or anything like that, or drought killed my family. It's not like that. My parents died of old age, and there's only me. Okay, so there are more old people than young people. And we talked about that on population pyramids video when you've got in these post-industrial nations where you've got more old people, more people retired than working. And what that looks like on a demographic transition chart is that our birth rate is lower than our death rate. And that's what's going to cause our population to start to sink. These nations here are called post-industrial nations. And I'm going to have to put that right here. All right, I tried to actually condense this as much as I could. It's actually a huge, huge topic, is how a country progresses, even in this country, even in the state of Texas. Let's look at the state of Texas. You got back in the 1800s where there is no law. Imagine that. In Texas, there was a time when there was no law. Like France owned part of this state for a while, Spain, Mexico. Texas was its own country for a little while. It was annexed by the United States. So there's all this unrest. Nobody really knows who the government is. There is no law. So even Texas, we had the Texas Rangers that were sort of like, well, I won't digress on the history of the Rangers, but it's a very rough time. People are trying to eke out an existence, subsistence farming, panning for gold, fighting off Native Americans, that sort of thing. And then you have a transition into an industrialized society. And you can start to see this with machines, with fossil fuel power, with the advent of electricity or the coming of electricity. And then a fully industrialized nation where there's a huge culture shift. There's a massive sort of political, cultural, social awakening, and things are definitely leaving the farm, okay? And we're now in business suits and high-rise buildings and that sort of thing. Now in a post-industrial nation, then that is just a progression of these mindsets and these changes to where it's actually decreasing. Japan is a classic example of this, and the United States is really starting to become an example of this as well. Germany is an example of this, of a fully post-industrialized nation that had huge advances in technology and industry very, very early on, and now, without immigration, they would be dying. They would be disappearing cultures.